Susan Lee, Fox Business correspondent, Tammy Bruce, Fox News contributor and Fox Nation host of Get Me Tammy Bruce, and Nicholas Thompson. He's editor-in-chief of Wired. And Nicholas, I'm so glad to have you on the show. I've admired your work for a long time. Maybe if I could ask you about this question that is brewing on Capitol Hill and on the campaign trail, which is, should big tech and Facebook in particular be broken up?
I mean, that is a huge question. And it comes down to how much power you think any company should have and whether you think Facebook should have been allowed to merge with Instagram, WhatsApp, and Oculus, and whether unwinding it would lead to more competition. Zuckerberg clearly doesn't want to be broken up, as he said to you. But he doesn't want to be broken up because this full Facebook conglomerate has a lot of power and a lot of influence. And when I was listening to his answer, one thing that was going through my head was, well, if you really want more free speech in America, maybe the best way to have that happen would be to have there be more tech platforms that could compete with each other on how much free speech they give and test out different balances between free speech and safety. So maybe the core of what he was saying yesterday was intention with what he just said to you.
Susan, though, from your perspective, you've covered this industry for a long time. Does he have a point that breaking it up is not going to necessarily make it any better?
Well, I would argue also against Nick because I think Zuckerberg was saying there are tons of social media platforms out there. We're not the only one, right? And it depends on how you regulate Facebook. Do you see it as a media company? Do you see it as a utility? And then I think that defines on how they use and police free speech and also how the company should be regulated in terms of how big it gets from here.
Tammy, Facebook for a long time had dealt with, concerns about bias against conservatives. But I got to tell you, the Joe Biden spokesperson yesterday said this, that the Zuckerberg, if I could get this, Zuckerberg attempted to use the Constitution as a shield for his company's bottom line, and his choice to cloak Facebook's policy in a feigned concern for free expression demonstrates how unprepared his company is for the unique moment in our history and how little it has learned over the past few years. And I wanted to get your take on this, Tammy, because Facebook tried to take the conservatives' concerns seriously, and it seems that the left is actually quite frustrated about that. They would rather have the government get involved.
Well, yes, and I think that, interestingly, though, with his comments to you, I'm struck by the concern regarding one guy feeling the need to reassure us about his commitment to the First Amendment and that we would need to be reassured by him. He's unelected. He's one guy. He has a big company. And that alone should tell us that perhaps there's just too much control, that he's the one out there reassuring us that everything's all right. And by the way, the Constitution is a shield for people. That's why it exists. The amendments and the Constitution itself.
You're referring to the Biden spokesperson.
Right, that comment about using this and the issue of freedom of expression. But it does come, in a sense, a bit late. It does seem somewhat disingenuous. I'll remind people back in 2016 with the trending news section where you had news curators, which had been originally denied.
Which they addressed.
They shut the whole thing down. But originally, I think when you're looking at a corporate culture that moves a dynamic which tends to go only in one direction, which is to censor conservatives and have a bias of removing conservative ideas or profiles, that should be a concern. And look, he's got a lot of things on his plate. You've got dismantling possibly Section 230. He's worried about that, which is the Internet Liability Shield. Maxine Waters, cryptocurrency, the antitrust probes with the DOJ.
Let me just tell you, there was a million things.
He's got a lot going on.
There were a million things that I could have covered. He gave me a lot of time.
But that's why he's doing this. But I think this is why he's doing this. This is, a public relations framework to make himself perhaps more sympathetic and to get people on his side, believing that he's our friend.
Let me ask you, Nicholas, about the viewpoint of this from maybe a Silicon Valley perspective. Not a political one necessarily, although there's politics involved. But what about the other companies out there and how they're thinking about this moment and Mark Zuckerberg's decision to step out and say, I'm going to lay down a marker here and say that we should defend free speech?
I think it's an incredibly interesting moment because there's no question that in Silicon Valley, the attachment to the ideals of free speech has changed a lot over the last decade. And the people who run Silicon Valley speak much less often about the First Amendment. They don't speak of being the free speech wing of the free speech party, as Twitter used to be called. There is no doubt that on the issue of free speech, Silicon Valley has moved away from absolutism about the First Amendment. And so I actually think it was kind of bold for Zuckerberg to stake out this claim. However, it is also true that it is slightly hypocritical. Facebook has censored nudity since the very beginning. Facebook censors content it deems terrorist. Facebook knocks out content it thinks it's false. Instagram.
When you bring up terrorists, I
yes.
Mean, he does seem to have a responsibility.
That's why the issue is complicated. Yeah, right. But I'm saying that Zuckerberg cast himself as a free speech absolutist. Right. He did that more because that's a good position to take. But he's not. And maybe actually he's in a decent area. So my argument is Facebook is moving in the direction of free speech. They're not completely there, but they might not be in an awful spot on the continuum right now.
All right, Susan Li, your thoughts on that?
I would just say from a business perspective, as Zuckerberg told you, Mark told you, this is not smart for the investment community. I mean, the stock is still down from its record highs and it lost a quarter of its value in that one day he talked about with you
when they closed the news tab.
That's right.
There was a big financial cost to them for doing that.
So protecting free speech is costing the company. This is not a smart business move, but I think maybe reputationally it might be a better choice.
One final word to you, Tammy.
Well, I think that this is at least the right direction, right? If he's serious and if he means well and if he would actually begin to implement it. But it seems like there's a lot of edges there that don't necessarily get applied correctly. And again, the corporate culture has been very consistent at Facebook, and it hasn't been fair or balanced.
All right, Susan, Tammy, and Nicholas, thank you so much.